My billionaire father's mistress and my mother got pregnant at the exact same time. My father, Richard Sinclair, constantly promised that his entire empire would belong to me. Yet, in reality, every ounce of his affection went to his mistress, Isla. Determined to secure my birthright, I turned my mother's womb into a relentless training ground in my first life. I exercised, flipped, and forced myself to absorb every bit of prenatal education. I did not rest for a single second. But my frantic overactivity proved fatal. The umbilical cord wrapped tightly around my neck, suffocating me. The sheer stress of my struggle caused my mother to hemorrhage and pass away during childbirth. Just like that, my father's entire fortune fell into the lap of his newborn illegitimate daughter. Even the Grim Reaper took pity on my tragic end. Before sending my soul back in time, he offered me a single piece of cosmic wisdom: just lay flat. As my consciousness drifted back into the warm, dark amniotic fluid, I suddenly heard a sharp, arrogant voice echoing in my mind. It was my unborn half-sister, Madeline. So what if she is the legitimate firstborn? Father loves children who strive for greatness. If I start working hard right now, I will steal all his affection. The entire inheritance will be mine. I mentally shrugged, blowing a few bubbles in the dark. Fine by me. Knock yourself out, sis. I am going to lie back and enjoy the ride. Let us see whose hands the fortune ends up in this time. Right now, we were in a luxury maternity recovery suite. My father was casually dismissing my mother's tears. Eleanor, I don't care about that woman. Once she gives birth, I'll pay her off, keep the baby, and send her away. My legacy belongs to our daughter. Just focus on resting and stop making a scene. That was what he said. But to keep an eye on his beloved mistress, he completely ignored my mother's dignity and moved Isla into the suite right next door. Separated by a single wall, I could hear every single thought running through Madeline's mind. Why is father still wasting time with that old hag? I need to get his attention, fast. 1, 2, 3, kick. I'm going to dance my heart out. A moment later, Isla's delighted voice carried through the wall. Richard. Come quickly. The baby is dancing in my tummy. My father rushed over without a second thought. Look at that rhythm. She actually reacts to Mozart. She is going to be a prodigy. Seeing the sharp movements beneath Isla's skin, my father beamed with pride. As expected of a child of Richard Sinclair. Showing such talent before she is even born. With a wave of his hand, he wired Isla $50,000 on the spot, telling her to hire the best prenatal music tutor money could buy. Madeline became even more enthusiastic in her womb. Thank you, Daddy. Watch me drop some beats. Boom clap, boom clap. That useless Penelope must be green with envy. So what if she is the legitimate daughter? She can't even compare to my pinky toe. As her internal monologue grew louder and more obnoxious, I figuratively covered my ears and rolled my eyes in the amniotic fluid. In my last life, I was exactly like her. Desperate for a scrap of my father's attention, I turned the womb into a relentless training camp, kicking and flipping to prove my worth, never giving my mother a moment of peace. The result? I strangled myself and bled my mother to death in the delivery room. I did not care if the Grim Reaper's advice to lay flat actually worked. I was simply done trying so hard. Hearing the laughter next door, my mother's resentment boiled over. Trying to win back her husband, she called out, Richard. Our daughter is dancing to the music too. Come look. She gently stroked her stomach, whispering desperately to me. Sweetheart, we can't let that mistress's child outshine us. For the sake of your father's billions, please, move a little. Sensing my father was about to leave, Madeline kicked Isla's uterine wall with all her might. Cry. Pretend it hurts. Do whatever it takes to keep father here. Father's eyes belong on me. I won't let Penelope steal my spotlight. Isla gasped in genuine pain, clutching her belly. Richard, it hurts, please stay with me. My father still held some lingering hope for me. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped back into my mother's room. Is Penelope dancing too? Let me see what she can do. He rested his palm on my mother's swollen belly. She forced a smile. Yes, she was just moving around so beautifully. Penelope, darling, be a good girl and show your father. Seeing the desperate, humiliated look on my mother's face broke my heart. But remembering the Reaper's words, I steeled myself and remained completely still. No matter how much my mother coaxed, I did not budge. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep. In the heavy, awkward silence, the expectation in my father's eyes withered into disappointment. It seems Penelope simply lacks Madeline's spark. The moment he walked out of the room, my mother let out a tearful sigh, reprimanding me under her breath. Penelope, why are you so stubborn? Your father clearly favors Madeline. If you don't show him what you can do, that girl will strip us of everything we own. But before she could finish, a sharp scream echoed from next door. Ah. It hurts. I can't take this. Stop moving, baby, please, call a doctor. Isla was sobbing, thrashing around the bed in agony. The sheer violence of the noise left my mother stunned. Slowly, she looked down at her own peaceful stomach and let out a breathless, relieved laugh. My sweet girl. You really do love your mother, don't you? You didn't want me to suffer. Fine, if you don't want to move, don't move. As long as we both make it through this healthy, that is all that matters. Madeline did not care about Isla's physical limits. Driven by her obsession with outperforming me, she kicked even harder. You don't understand, mother. Penelope was trying to steal my spotlight. I have to work harder. I need father to see that I am the chosen one, the only true heir to his empire. The more Isla screamed, the faster Madeline thrashed. My father, utterly blinded by his own pride, completely ignored his mistress's agony. She clearly inherited my superior genes. Such strength, such vigor. Prenatal movement is perfectly natural, Isla. Stop being so dramatic. Listening to the endless wails through the wall, I smiled to myself. Keep going, Madeline. Work yourself into a tight little knot. Let us see how much you like having the umbilical cord wrapped around your throat. Isla eventually blacked out from the sheer intensity of the pain. As the corridor outside filled with the chaotic sounds of rushing doctors, I snuggled closer to my mother's warm uterine wall, fully committing to my life of leisure. Don't worry, Mom. In this life, I am not going to let you suffer. From that day on, Madeline fully embraced her life as an prenatal overachiever. With 4 months left before our birth, she decided to start her body management routine. I must control my appetite from the womb. I will reject all unnecessary calories. Father will definitely prefer a daughter with a perfect figure. Once Penelope balloons into a chubby pig, I will stun everyone with my gorgeous silhouette. She punched Isla's stomach to induce nausea, preventing her from keeping any food down. Within weeks, Isla looked skeletal, her skin dry and her eyes hollow. Meanwhile, my mother enjoyed every single meal. Because I was quiet and content, her appetite was fantastic. She ate rich, healthy soups and fresh fruits, and her skin began to glow with radiant health. But Madeline only thought it was hilarious. Keep stuffing your faces. Once you're as fat as a pig, father will dump you. I hope Penelope gets so massive that she causes a fatal birth obstruction. While Isla starved, Madeline was also pushing herself through an extreme workout regimen. At 5 in the morning, while my mother and I were still happily sleeping, Isla would be jolted awake by violent movements in her belly. An hour of stretching, an hour of yoga, and then 100 backflips. I will show father that Penelope does nothing but eat and sleep, while I am overflowing with drive. I am the rightful heir. After her flips, she would immediately begin dancing along with the prenatal music tutor. In our suite, my mother and I would wake up late, enjoy a hearty breakfast, do some gentle breathing exercises, and then lounge on the balcony to soak up the morning sun. Isla watched us from her window with pure envy. But the moment she tried to rest, Madeline would pull on her umbilical cord to force her back up. Don't drag me down. Read those English flashcards to me. We need to get the inheritance. Isla survived entirely on 4 fluids, her body trembling with exhaustion. My father, though repulsed by Isla's withered state, was increasingly amazed by Madeline's constant activity. She is absorbing the very essence of your vitality, Isla. This child is destined for greatness. But when he looked at me, his face fell. Penelope is my firstborn, but she is completely lifeless. She has no reaction to music or languages, and she is 3 pounds heavier than Madeline. If she remains this lazy, I will have to reconsider my estate planning. My mother defended me fiercely. My daughter is gentle and perfect. She made my pregnancy a dream. If you're biased, just say so. My father only shook his head, his eyes cold. I simply turned over and went back to sleep. The game was far from over. Soon, the day of our final prenatal checkup arrived. Even my grandparents were shocked when they saw Isla's state. How did you become so skeletal? Can you even deliver a healthy baby like this? Isla opened her mouth to speak, but only dry heaved. The grandparents turned away in disgust, looking at my mother instead. Now, Eleanor knows how to nurture a pregnancy. Look at her glowing skin. That is what a healthy heir looks like. Madeline was furious. What do you old fools know? I'm slender so I can slide right out. Penelope is going to get stuck. When she is struggling, I will trigger an early labor, climb out first, and claim the crown. During the ultrasound, Madeline forced herself to turn around and wave her tiny hand at the screen, completely ignoring the fact that the umbilical cord was already wrapped around her neck 3 times. My grandparents gasped in delight. A prodigy. She is communicating with us. This level of intelligence belongs to our future leader. My father was beaming with pride. I agree. Her due date is 2 weeks after Penelope's, but if she could just come earlier, I would make her my firstborn. Madeline was ecstatic. You should have said so earlier, Daddy. An early birth? I can do that. Watch me, I'm coming out right now to claim my title. Suddenly, Isla gasped, clutching her abdomen as she collapsed to the floor. My water broke. I think the baby is coming. Madeline was fully committed to her stunt. Before Isla's cervix could even dilate, she began violently forcing her way down the birth canal. Just a little more push, and father's billions are mine. Seeing Isla lose consciousness from the sudden, massive hemorrhage, my father panicked, lifting her and rushing toward the delivery room. My grandparents ran close behind. My mother was left standing in the hallway, her face pale. Penelope, is she really going to be born first and take everything from us? My heart sank. The plan was changing. Now that Madeline was forcing her way out, I couldn't just stay passive anymore. I checked my position. My head was down, my body strong, and my limbs were fully developed. I decided to move. My mother gasped, clutching her stomach as a massive contraction hit her. At the exact same time, Madeline's thoughts next door grew faint and desperate. I'm so hungry. I can't push. Cough, why is there so much blood rushing into my mouth? I'm choking. And this cord, why is it so tight? Hearing her struggle, my hope flared. I used my strong, healthy limbs to push myself downward. Suddenly, my father walked into our room, tossing a thick document onto my mother's bed. Sign the divorce papers, Eleanor. You'll get a generous settlement, but Penelope won't touch a dime of my fortune. My mother stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. But my water broke too. I'm about to give birth. My father looked at her with utter indifference. Madeline is coming out. She is my finest child, and I won't let anyone question her status. I will make sure she is my legitimate firstborn. He forced a pen into her hand. Heartbroken and exhausted, my mother prepared to sign. Fine. I'll sign. From now on, she has nothing to do with you. I kicked frantically against her ribs. Mom, don't give up. Madeline is choking in there. She hasn't won yet. My father glanced toward the door, a smug smile on his face. Don't blame me, Eleanor. Blame Penelope for being useless. She couldn't even beat Madeline to the finish line. Madeline's thoughts echoed weakly. Almost there, push. I will be the billionaire heiress. Daddy is going to love me so much. Penelope will never stand a chance. I struggled to push, but my mother was too devastated to help. I found myself stuck in the birth canal, unable to move. Was everything going to end up in Madeline's hands again? Just as my mother's hand began to write her name, a panicked scream echoed from the delivery room next door. Oh my God. The baby is in danger. The scream from the room next door didn't just cut through the wall, it ripped the air right out of my mother's chest. Oh God. The heart rate is dropping. Get the crash cart. We have a placental abruption. Footsteps thundered across the linoleum outside. Metal trays rattled. A doctor's voice, sharp and stripped of all bedside manner, barked, "She's bleeding out. Prepare operating room 3 for an emergency C-section right now." Inside our quiet luxury suite, time froze. My father, holding the silver pen, froze mid-gesture. The divorce papers lay flat on the crisp white duvet between my mother's trembling knees. He turned his head toward the door, his face draining of color, not out of concern for Isla, but out of absolute, naked panic for his prized asset. Madeline. He whispered. My mother, Eleanor, sat with her eyes wide, tears tracking down her flushed cheeks. Her hands gripped the bedsheets so tight her knuckles were porcelain white. Richard, please. Sign it, Eleanor, Richard demanded, his voice suddenly sharp, ruthless. He shoved the pen into her cold fingers. Sign it now. I need to go to Isla. If Madeline is delivered by C-section right now, she'll be born before Penelope. I need this legal clean break so Madeline is recorded as my sole legitimate heir. The second she takes her first breath. He was insane. Blinded by his own ego and the fantasy of a prodigy daughter, he didn't even care that Isla was bleeding to death. All he cared about was Timestamps on birth certificates. My mother lowered the pen toward the paper. Her spirit was entirely broken. If that's what you want. No, Mom. In the dark warmth of her womb, I didn't flip. I didn't perform a backflip or strangle myself with my own life support. I simply took my tiny, fully developed left foot and gave her right kidney a firm, deliberate, non-stressful nudge. Wake up, Eleanor. Look at him. The sharp, clean pressure inside her belly made my mother gasp. She looked down at her abdomen, then up at the man who had traded 10 years of marriage for a woman who danced on command. She saw the coldness in his eyes. She saw that he didn't love Isla, he didn't love Madeline, and he certainly didn't love her. He loved control. Slowly, deliberately, Eleanor pulled her hand back. She took the thick stack of divorce papers, folded them in half, and tore them right down the middle. Get out, she said. Her voice didn't shake anymore. It was dead calm. What did you just do? Richard snarled, stepping forward. I said, get out of my room, Eleanor replied, her eyes burning with a sudden, quiet rage. My water broke 20 minutes ago. My baby is perfectly healthy. Her heart rate is steady, and she is coming right now. If you don't leave this room in 3 seconds, I will call the security team my father hired for this hospital and have you thrown out on the street. Richard stared at her, stunned by the sudden spine of a woman he had spent years crushing. But another agonized shriek from next door broke his trance. Mr. Sinclair, a nurse yelled, poking her head into our doorway, her surgical mask half hanging from her ear. Miss Isla is hemorrhaging. The fetus is in severe fetal distress. The umbilical cord is wrapped around its neck multiple times. We need you to sign the emergency consent forms for the operation. Richard's face went pale. He cast one last furious glance at my mother. You'll regret this, Eleanor. Penelope will get nothing. He turned and bolted down the hall. The room fell quiet, save for the steady, rhythmic hum of my mother's heart. She leaned back against the pillows, taking a long, ragged breath. Okay. Penelope, she whispered, stroking the side of her belly where I nestled comfortably. It's just you and me. Let's do this smoothly. I didn't struggle. I didn't rush. Guided by the natural rhythm of her contractions, I simply slid downward, smooth as silk. 10 minutes later, with 3 gentle pushes from my mother and 0 drama, I entered the world. Wah. I gave one polite, required cry to clear my lungs, then immediately closed my eyes and relaxed into the warm towel the nurse wrapped around me. Time of birth, 2:14 a.m., the doctor announced, smiling brightly as she placed me on my mother's chest. A healthy, perfect baby girl. 7 pounds, 8 ounces. APGAR score 10 out of 10. My mother wept, but this time, the tears were clean. She kissed the top of my damp head. Welcome, Penelope. Across the hall, the quiet was shattered by the sound of panic. Through the thin gap beneath our hospital door, I could hear the faint, erratic static of Madeline's soul screaming. It was a strange, psychic echo, a ghost of the monologue we had shared in the dark. Why can't I breathe? Cut the cord. Cut it. Daddy, look at me. I'm pushing. I'm. The voice trailed off into a hollow, suffocating silence. At 2:48 a.m., 34 minutes after my peaceful arrival, the operating doors next door slammed open. Madeline was dragged into the light of the world via an emergency crash. C-section. But there was no joyful announcement. No cheer from my father. She's not breathing. We have no pulse. Get the pediatric crash cart. Start. CPR. Madeline had pushed so violently against Isla's uterine wall that she had detached the placenta early, flooding the womb with blood while suffocating herself in 3 tight loops of her own umbilical cord. She wanted to be born first. She wanted to be the prodigy. Instead, she was born 34 minutes late, limp, blue, and deprived of oxygen for nearly 8 agonizing minutes. When the medical team finally got her heart beating again, the brain damage was already done. In the quiet of our room, as my mother held me close, I let out a tiny, soft baby sigh and nestled deeper into the blanket. I told you, sis. The Grim Reaper knows what he's talking about. You should have just laid flat. The Sinclair family estate was a sprawling, cold monstrosity of steel, glass, and white marble perched on the cliffs of Malibu. It looked less like a home and more like a high-end museum where happiness went to die. By the time I was 2 years old, the divide in the Sinclair household had hardened into concrete. My father, Richard, had not managed to divorce my mother. My grandfather, the true founder of Sinclair Enterprises, a ruthless old man named Arthur Sinclair, had stepped in the moment he saw the birth certificates and the medical reports. Arthur cared about one thing above all else: legacy. And legacy required stability, not public scandals involving brain-damaged illegitimate children and half-dead mistresses. "Eleanor stays your wife," grandfather Arthur had snapped at my father during a family dinner when I was 18 months old. I was sitting in my high chair, happily mashing a piece of steamed carrot into a fine paste. "Penelope is the firstborn, legitimate heir. Her birth certificate is sealed. You will not embarrass this family further." Richard had looked bitterly across the table at me. I was a ridiculously easy baby. I didn't scream at night. I didn't throw tantrums. When my mother put me down for a nap, I slept. When she gave me food, I ate. I met all my developmental milestones exactly on time, not a day early, not a day late. I walked at 12 months because it was convenient for getting to the couch. I spoke my first words at 11 months because I wanted more milk. To my grandfather, I was a masterpiece of calm, aristocratic composure. "Look at her," Arthur had praised, watching me quietly chew my carrot. "She has the Sinclair ice in her veins. She doesn't waste energy on useless theatricals." To my father, however, my calm was an insult. "She's lazy." Richard had spat, slamming his wine glass down. "She doesn't do anything." At her age, children of genius intellect should be speaking in full sentences, playing the violin, identifying classic art. "And what is your other child doing, Richard?" Arthur had asked, his voice dripping with icy contempt. Richard flinched. In the east wing of the estate, kept hidden from the press, lived Isla and Madeline. Isla had survived the emergency surgery, but her uterus had been removed to save her life, ending any chance of her ever bearing Richard another child. She had transformed from a vibrant, scheming mistress into a desperate, neurotic shell of a woman obsessed with forcing Madeline to prove her worth. And Madeline, poor, insane Madeline. Because of the severe hypoxia at birth, Madeline suffered from hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. Her brain had survived, but her physical motor controls were severely damaged. She had spastic cerebral palsy. Yet, the tragic twist of fate was that her mind, the arrogant, hyperactive soul of the reincarnated overachiever, was fully conscious inside that trapped, uncooperative body. I knew this because whenever my mother took me for walks in the estate gardens, and we passed the east wing patio, I could hear Madeline's internal monologue screaming through the air like broken radio static. Isla would sit Madeline in a high-tech, thousands of dollars physical therapy harness, forcing the 2-year-old girl to try and stack wooden blocks. "Come on, Maddie. Show your father." Isla would weep, sweat dripping down her pale face as she moved the child's rigid, trembling arms. "Pick up the block. Pick it up." Inside her mind, Madeline was roaring, "I can do it. I am the prodigy. I am Madeline Sinclair. Hand, move. Move, you useless piece of flesh. I have to do math. I have to dance. Daddy is looking at me." But on the outside, Madeline's body would jerk violently. Her arm would snap sideways, knocking the blocks off the table, and a string of drool would spill over her bottom lip as her neck muscles spasmed. She couldn't form words. She could only emit harsh, guttural sounds, triple AGGH. Richard would stand at the edge of the patio, watching this tragic display with a mixture of horror and mounting disgust. In my first life, I had sacrificed my life to give him a prodigy. Madeline had done the same in this life. And what was her reward? Once Richard realized she would never walk gracefully, never play the violin, and never be the brilliant puppet he could show off to his billionaire friends. His immense love vanished like smoke in the wind. He visited the East Wing less and less. He stopped wiring Isla $50,000 a pop. He paid for her medical bills out of obligation, but his eyes were cold whenever he looked at them. One afternoon, while I was sitting under the shadow of an oak tree in the garden, playing lazily with a blue butterfly that had landed on my shoe, Richard walked past. He stopped, staring at me. "You think you won, don't you?" he muttered to me, his voice low and bitter. My mother was a few feet away, talking to the head gardener. I slowly turned my head, looking up at my billionaire father with big, vacant, innocent toddler eyes. "Dada," I said plainly, offering him a half-eaten leaf I had picked off the grass. He sneered, knocking the leaf out of my small hand. "Useless. Just like your mother. You have no drive. No ambition. Enjoy your childhood, Penelope. The moment your grandfather dies, I am rewriting the trust. You won't get a single dime of my empire unless you earn it." He turned on his heel and walked away. I looked at the leaf flutter to the ground. Then I tilted my head back, looked up at the warm sun, and lay flat on the grass, letting out a small, contented sigh. Earn it? I thought, closing my eyes for an afternoon nap. Why would I earn what's already legally mine? Keep working hard, Dad. You're just managing my company. Until I turn 18. By the time we were 7 years old, the contrast between the two branches of the Sinclair family had reached a boiling point. My mother, Eleanor, had completely transformed. Freed from the desperate need to win back a cheating husband, she had taken her marriage settlement funds, invested wisely in commercial real estate, and focused entirely on living a peaceful, healthy life. She looked 10 years younger, her skin glowing, her mind clear. She spent her days painting, managing her charities, and taking me on relaxed vacations to Italy and Japan. I, true to my vow, remained the undisputed queen of lying flat. At school, the prestigious St. Jude Academy for Young Heirs, I was the ultimate average student. I sat in the middle row. I scored exactly 85% on every test. Not high enough to draw attention, not low enough to require tutoring. When the teachers asked for volunteers to read aloud, I looked at the floor. When it was time for gym class, I magically developed mild asthma that allowed me to sit on the benches with a cold juice box and watch the other rich kids sweat themselves to exhaustion. I wasn't stupid. In fact, because my brain hadn't been fried by prenatal stress or suffocated at birth, my cognitive abilities were sharper than ever. I read complex economic papers on my tablet under the bedsheets at night just for fun. But I saw no reason to show off. Effort was a trap. The moment you showed people what you were capable of, they expected it from you every single day. Madeline, on the other hand, was living in a hell of her mother's making. Isla, desperate to regain Richard's favor as his interest in her faded, spent millions on experimental therapies, robotic exoskeletons, and intense neurological tutors for Madeline. Madeline's physical body remained severely impaired. She walked with a heavy limp, using specialized leg braces, and her speech was slow, slurred, and difficult to understand. But her mind was still burning with that desperate, frantic obsession to outshine me. Every year, St. Jude Academy held that annual Founders Gala and Student Showcase, a brutal night where billionaire parents paraded their children like prize ponies to impress investors. Richard had forced the school board to allow Madeline to perform, despite her physical limitations. He wanted to push the narrative of a triumphant, brave prodigy overcoming all odds. The auditorium was packed with tuxedos, diamond necklaces, and wall-to-wall press. My mother and I sat in the front row, quiet and unbothered. I was wearing a simple, comfortable velvet dress, munching on a pocketful of roasted almonds I had smuggled past the valet. Next to us, Richard sat rigid, his eyes glued to the stage. Isla was in the second row, her face pale, chewing her fake nails to the quick. The curtain rose. Madeline was positioned at a massive grand piano in the center of the stage. Her frail legs were locked into metallic braces, her arms trembling in custom leather wrist supports. The crowd went silent. Richard leaned forward, his heart practically pounding out of his chest. "Show them, Madeline," he whispered under his breath. "Show them you're a Sinclair." I could hear Madeline's internal monologue from 5 rows away. It was a deafening, chaotic scream inside her head. This is it. This is my moment. Penelope is sitting there doing nothing as usual. I will play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. I rehearsed this 10,000 times. Father will love me. He will give me the empire. She lifted her hands. The tremor in her right arm was severe, but she forced her fingers down onto the keys. Plink. Clang. The first chord hit, but it wasn't Beethoven. Her fingers, locked in spastic tension, struck 3 wrong notes at once. The sound was a jarring, horrible dissonance that echoed through the acoustic hall. A subtle murmur rippled through the audience of elite parents. Madeline panicked. No. No. Wrong key. Again. Work, you stupid hands, work. She slammed her hands down again. Harder. Clatter. Bang. The noise was chaotic, aggressive, and entirely out of tune. Her left leg spasmed in its brace, kicking the wooden panel under the piano with a loud thud. Isla gasped from the second row, dropping her purse. Richard's face darkened from pride to deep, burning embarrassment. What is she doing? He muttered, pulling at his collar. She rehearsed this. Madeline was sweating profusely, her eyes wild, her tongue caught between her teeth as she forced her body to comply. But the more she stressed her nervous system, the worse the spasms became. Her right wrist buckled, slipping off the keys, and her hand smashed into the wooden lip of the keyboard with a sickening crack. Ah-gh. Madeline let out a loud, garbled shriek of pain over the microphone. She lost her balance. The heavy leg braces couldn't hold her weight as she leaned sideways, and with a terrible wooden crash, Madeline fell off the piano bench, tumbling onto the polished stage floor like a broken doll. The entire auditorium gasped. Oh, my God, a woman in the third row whispered. Is that Richard Sinclair's illegitimate daughter? Why would he put that poor child up there? That's practically child abuse. He just wanted to flex, how grotesque. Richard froze in his seat. He didn't jump up to help her. He didn't run to the stage. He just sat there, his cheeks burning red with raw humiliation, as dozens of smartphone cameras flashed in the dark, capturing his failure. Isla scrambled onto the stage, crying out as she tried to lift the thrashing, sobbing Madeline off the floor. Madeline's inner mind was shrieking in utter agony, no. Don't look at me. Daddy. Don't look at me like that. I can do it. I can play it. Let me try again. As the stage crew rushed to pull the curtains closed, Richard suddenly turned his furious, desperate eyes to me. He grabbed my 7-year-old arm, pulling me out of my seat. Penelope. Go up. There. My mother immediately stood up, her eyes flashing. Richard, let go of her. Shut up, Eleanor. Richard hissed, his grip tightening on my wrist. He looked at me with manic expectation. Penelope, you are my daughter. You have been taking piano lessons for 3 years. Go up there, play something perfect, and save this family's name. Do it right now. The spotlight swung toward us. The entire room of billionaires and reporters turned their attention to the legitimate heir of the Sinclair fortune. I stood there. I looked at my father's red, sweating, desperate face. I looked at the stage where Madeline was being carried off in tears. Then, I did what I do best. I let my arm go completely limp. I let my knees buckle slightly, gave a huge, loud, exaggerated yawn, and rubbed my eyes. Daddy, I said, my voice echoing clearly through the silent front rows. I'm sleepy. Can we go home? My tummy hurts when you yell. A collective soft ah swept through the crowd. Look at him, someone sneered near the back. Traumatizing his normal daughter. Because his other one flopped. What a terrible father. Richard's face turned from red to ghost white. He looked around at the judging eyes of the global elite, feeling the weight of their total disgust. He slowly let go of my wrist, his hand shaking. My mother took my hand, tucked me under her arm, and looked down at Richard with pure disdain. We are going home, Richard. Send your lawyers if you have a problem with it. As we walked down the red-carpeted aisle toward the exit, I rested my head comfortably against my mother's shoulder. I glanced back over her shoulder just in time to see Richard slump into his chair, completely isolated, ruined by the very vanity he had tried so hard to cultivate. I closed my eyes and went to sleep right there in my mother's arms. 0 effort. Maximum impact. 10 years passed in a blink of an eye. By the time I turned 17, the Sinclair corporate empire was slipping through my father's fingers like sand. Grandfather Arthur had passed away when I was 14. But before the old man died, he did something that caused my father to lose his mind completely. Arthur bypassed Richard entirely in his final will. 35% of the voting shares of Sinclair Global, the controlling stake, were placed into a blind trust. The condition for the trust was simple. The day Penelope Sinclair turned 18, full ownership and voting rights of those shares would automatically transfer to her. Richard was left as acting CEO, but he was essentially a glorified babysitter for a seat he didn't own. Meanwhile, his personal life was a complete disaster. Isla, unable to bear the loss of wealth, youth, and status, had succumbed to severe depression and substance abuse. She lived in a rented villa in Miami, paid off by a modest monthly stipend, completely removed from the Sinclair estate. Madeline was 17 now, living in a specialized residential medical facility. Her physical condition had stabilized, but she was wheelchair-bound. I visited her once, 6 months before my 18th birthday. It was a quiet afternoon. I walked into the sunny courtyard of the clinic, wearing a comfortable cashmere sweater and sweatpants, holding a iced matcha latte. Madeline was sitting in her motorized wheelchair, looking at the rose garden. When she saw me approach, her body stiffened. The electronic display on her chair beeped as her pulse spiked. P. Penelope, she rasped, her vocal cord struggling to push out the syllables. I pulled up a metal chair, sat down, and took a sip of my boba through the straw. Look at you, her internal voice hit my mind, fainter now, weakened by years of neurological medications, but still filled with that bitter, immortal rage. You sloth. You lazy bitch. You never did a single thing. You didn't work. You didn't fight. Why do you get the shares? Why do you get everything? I looked into her hollow, frustrated eyes. I didn't feel hatred for her. I felt a strange, cosmic pity. You still don't get it, do you, Madeline? I said quietly, speaking so softly the nurses nearby couldn't hear. Madeline's eyes widened. In our last life, I continued, leaning forward slightly, I was the one who kicked. I was the one who flipped. I wanted father's love so badly that I strangled myself and killed our mother. I thought if I worked hard enough, I could control the world. Madeline froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. Last life. Her mind stammered in shock. You remember. The Grim Reaper gave me one sentence, I said, smiling faintly as I swirled the ice in my cup. Just lay flat. The world isn't a race you win by burning your own house down. Richard Sinclair is a parasite. He feeds on performance. He feeds on your desperation to prove yourself to him. The harder you tried to impress him, the more of your life you destroyed for a man who doesn't even care about you. Tears began to well up in Madeline's eyes, running down her pale, motionless cheeks. You ruined your own brain before you even saw the light of day, I added gently. All because you couldn't stand the thought of sitting still. She let out a wet, strangled sob. I just wanted to win, her inner voice wept, shrinking into a tiny, fragile whisper. I wanted Daddy to pick me. He never picks anyone, I replied, standing up and smoothing down my sweater. He only picks himself. But don't worry, sis. Tomorrow is my 18th birthday. I'm going to finish this for both of us. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in New York City was packed with 500 of the world's most powerful executives, shareholders, and media reporters. It was the annual general meeting of Sinclair Global. Richard Sinclair stood at the mahogany podium, wearing a $10,000 suit. He looked older, his hair silvered at the temples, deep stress lines carved into his brow. He was pitching a massive, high-risk acquisition of an AI tech firm, a desperate move to inflate the company's stock price and secure his position as CEO before the trust unlocked. This acquisition will define the next 50 years of Sinclair Global. Richard shouted into the microphone, his voice booming across the hall. We need vision. We need relentless drive. We cannot afford weakness or passivity at the helm of this conglomerate. He slammed his hand on the podium, gesturing toward the board of directors seated to his left. I have served as your CEO for 20 years. Today, as my daughter Penelope turns 18, a portion of the family trust activates. But I ask the board to invoke Clause 9, the incompetence clause, to freeze the voting rights of those shares. Penelope Sinclair has shown zero interest in business, zero academic ambition, and zero leadership capability. She is a girl who does nothing. A hush fell over the room. The board members looked uncomfortably at each other. Some whispered. The reporter's cameras zoomed in on Richard's face. She is lazy. Richard bellowed, his voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. She spends her days sleeping, lounging, and wasting time. Handing 35% of this empire to someone who refuses to put in effort is corporate suicide. From the very back of the ballroom, a soft, clear voice broke through the noise. Effort is only valuable if it produces results, father. Otherwise, it's just panicked thrashing. The crowd turned. The media cameras whipped around. I walked down the central aisle. I wasn't wearing an intimidating corporate power suit. I wore an elegant, simple silk dress, my hair resting naturally over my shoulders, my expression as calm as a glass lake. Behind me walked two men in dark suits carrying heavy leather briefcases. Behind them walked my mother, Eleanor, looking radiant and completely at ease. Richard sneered from the stage. Penelope. You think you can just walk in here on your birthday and take my company? You don't even know how to read a balance sheet. I stopped at the foot of the stage, looking up at him. I don't need to read every line of your balance sheet, Dad, I said, my voice carrying effortlessly through the state-of-the-art sound system. I only needed to read the audit reports of the tech firm you're trying to buy. I signaled to one of the men behind me. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a stack of tablet devices, and handed them directly to the board members. Richard's eyes narrowed. What is that? That, I said, taking a step up the stage stairs, is the forensic financial report on your proposed acquisition. You spent 18 months, $80 million in consultant fees, and 300 working hours trying to force this deal through to prove your brilliance. I reached the top of the stage and stopped beside the podium. It took my private research team, which I hired 3 months ago while drinking tea on a beach in Bali, exactly 48 hours to discover that the tech firm's patents are entirely fraudulent. If you had signed that deal today, Sinclair Global would have lost $2 billion by next Tuesday. The lead board member gasped, his eyes scanning the tablet screen. My God. The revenue figures are forged. The entire IP portfolio is under litigation. The board erupted into chaos. Richard's face drained of every drop of blood. He stumbled back a step, grabbing the edge of the podium. No, that's impossible. I checked it myself. I worked 16 hours a day on this deal. That's your problem, Dad, I said, looking at him with mild pity. You work so hard, you thrash around so violently, that you blind yourself to what's right in front of your face. You mistake activity for progress. I reached into my small clutch purse, pulled out a single piece of paper, and placed it on the podium over his speech notes. This is the official certification of my 18-year-old trust transfer, I announced softly. Combined with my mother's 8% stake in the board members who have already signed their proxy votes over to me this morning, I now control 51% of Sinclair Global. The room exploded into a frenzy of camera flashes and shouting journalists. Miss Sinclair. Are you taking over as CEO? Mr. Sinclair, are you stepping down? Richard fell to his knees beside the podium. The man who had spent his entire life running, manipulating, and demanding absolute perfection from everyone around him was completely broken. Not by a grand, dramatic war, but by a girl who had simply waited for him to trip over his own frantic feet. You cheated. Richard whimpered, looking up at me with hollow, tear-filled eyes. How did you do this without working? I leaned down, whispering in his ear so only he could hear. I didn't cheat, Dad. I just laid flat. You did all the hard work of destroying yourself for me. 6 months later, the top floor of the Sinclair Global Tower in Manhattan had been completely remodeled. The harsh, metallic modern furniture was gone. In its place were plush, ultra-comfortable Scandinavian sofas, floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking Central Park, soft warm lighting, and an enormous, custom-made ergonomic Recliner behind the CEO desk. I sat in the recliner, wearing a comfortable cashmere sweater and thick wool socks, holding a fresh cup of brown sugar boba tea. My mother sat on the couch across from me, casually turning the page of a travel magazine. The Amalfi Coast looks lovely in June, Penelope. Are you sure you don't want to come? Maybe, I said, taking a slow sip through my straw. If the flight isn't too long. Moving takes energy. There was a soft knock on the double oak doors. My managing director, a brilliant, highly paid executive named Marcus, whom I had hired to actually run the day-to-day operations, walked in carrying a thin folder. Good morning, Chief, Marcus said respectfully. Quarterly profits are up 14%. The delegation system you implemented is working perfectly. You have 0 meetings scheduled for the rest of the week. Wonderful work, Marcus, I said, not even looking up from my phone. Give yourself a bonus and take Friday off. Thank you, ma'am. Marcus smiled, placed the single document on the corner of the desk, and quietly exited, closing the door behind him. That was the secret of true power. You don't work yourself to death. You find competent people, pay them exceptionally well, get out of their way, and let the engine run itself. I glanced at the small TV screen mounted discreetly on the wall. A news report was playing on silent. Former billionaire Richard Sinclair files for personal bankruptcy. The news showed a brief clip of my father walking out of a courtroom in a rumpled suit, dodging reporters, looking old, broken, and completely forgotten. Isla had officially left him, taking the last of her settlement money to open a failed boutique in Miami. And Madeline. I had moved Madeline to the finest neurological care facility in the world, fully funded by my personal estate. She had the best therapists, the softest room, and a quiet garden to live out her days without the crushing weight of Richard's expectations or Isla's desperate abuse. Her internal mind had finally stopped screaming. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, Madeline was just resting. I tapped my remote, turning the TV off. The room fell into a beautiful, perfect silence. I leaned back in my massive leather chair, adjusted my soft plush pillow behind my head, and looked out at the endless blue sky over New York City. The Grim Reaper was a wise man. I kicked off my slippers, closed my eyes, and went right back to sleep.